This is something that came out of our recent study group conversation, namely has to do with the magic of numbers. It is only quite recently that the numbers have assumed this nominal character. Before the beginning of let's say the Renaissance, going back in Middle Ages and even earlier through antiquity and so on, numbers were not necessarily considered as only nominals as we have them today. So we're talking about trying to break through these nominals and see what realities were once and will be in the future expressed by numbers and certain numbers. And when you look at the act of consecration of the human being, there is of course incredible wisdom included in that tier of the service, which has to do with repetitions of certain gestures, with patterns, with numbers. For instance, the Christ greeting, that apocalyptic message, Christ in you, occurs how many times during the service? 7. Yeah. And how many times do we cross ourselves during the service? 7. And of course, there are 4 main members, components, organs of the act of consecration: gospel reading, offertory, the so-called canon or transubstantiation, and the communion part of the service. Through that goes this weaving of these two, Christ in you and the crossing, almost as one can imagine in the supersensible organism of the human being. The nerve system and the heart circulatory system are running, so to speak. There is this numerical number wisdom also included in the service. And our dear Dr. Steiner, almost exactly 100 years ago, last week on Wednesday, spoke about it to the priest in the somewhat famous course on the Apocalypse. There's one lecture devoted just to number 7 and understanding how are we to not to take it only symbolically, which is a trend in our times, kind of a pendulum effect to this nominalistic approach to numbers, but really take it as a reality. And part of what I'm going to say here today has to do with that research. What is the reality of the holy number 7? The Waldorf pedagogy, anthroposophical music, anthroposophical understanding of colors, pretty much everything else is always based on the contemplation of number 7. 7 colors of the rainbow, 7 tones, 7 years of the becoming of the human being, which are de facto related to the orbit of Saturn. So 1 year on the Saturn lasts 4 times 7 years, right? It's 1 year on Saturn. So all those things are integral to our becoming. And the message there is that if we're searching for experience of the spiritual world, right? This knowledge we have, and thank God, and thanks Rudolf Steiner, I think we're still trying to break through to the level of experience. Consecration of the human being, the sacraments are events, social, spiritual events that take place in time and space. Because something what people often don't understand. They would assume, oh, if I have a book or text, you can have it on the internet today, and I'm going to read it. This is the act of consecration. Consecration of a human being is something that lives in your heart. The sounds, the gestures, the movements only in a certain sense allow this to become revealed in the world of senses. That's what sacrament is. And onto that substance of offering something from the spiritual world can actually descend. The service is not in my book. Even though in the seminary they make us really work hard, this beautiful book. I have 3 books. One is in English, one is in German, my first book, one is in English, my second. My third Polish book, I wrote with a pencil, because by then I understood what I tell you today, that the service is not written in priest's book. The service, the sacrament is something that's happening among us. Conditions are created, forms are given. That is this incredible contribution by Rudolf Steiner and his ability to give us these forms. By the way, 15th of September today is when Rudolf Steiner led Dr. Rittelmeier to become the first ordained priest. It's today. 102 years ago, first ordained priest in the stream of the renewed priesthood of Melchizedek was standing there in the White Hall of the Goetheanum and celebrating the act of consecration of man. 7. There is this name here, Rudolf Steiner, if you want later on, I have all the resources, all the GAs, where you would find Rudolf Steiner speak about this Trithemius von Sponheim. It's interesting, and genius of Rudolf Steiner, that even though he would give this revelation to the world, he would very often draw from occult traditions. And von Sponheim, in medieval times, late medieval times, spoke about the so-called angelic chronology or divine chronology. Not exactly the time as we measure, but spiritual beings that participate in Earth's evolution. And of course, we know that all through the gift of Rudolf Steiner, what he called in preface to the occult science, the story, the evolution of the Grail, right? The whole cosmic evolution from Saturn, Moon, Sun to Earth conditions. Then we have within these great cosmic cycles when the entire universe is changed every time. We have those planetary epochs, also 7. Right. So in the case of our becoming, we're talking about Polaria, Hyperborea, Lemuria. These are all occult names. Atlantis, and finally post-Atlantean epoch. Right, 7. And then these 7 again can be considered woven by the 7 cultural epochs. These have to do with the precession of the equinoxes. Right. So every 2160 years, the sun rises against, so to speak, the backdrop of one of the 12 constellations. We live in the epoch of fish right now. It started 1411. The epoch of the fish epoch will last, according to my calculations, I'm not a mathematician, just a poor theologian, last to 571. It's calculated as 1411 plus 2160. Yeah, that's the unit of precession. So these cultural epochs, our epoch, the epoch of the fish, Pisces, will be followed by the famous, somewhat, epoch of Aquarius. So we still have some time. So these are cultural epochs, and now there is something that this Trithemius von Sponheim spoke about out of deep mysteries, we must assume, which Rudolf Steiner spoke later, especially around 1924. You see it in Rudolf Steiner very often when he gets interested in something, or is inspired. There's just few lectures typically that he would investigate the subject. And he spoke about this, one can call it cosmic week. So the smallest, or next to smallest unit, cosmic unit of the divine chronology. Cosmic, planetary, cultural, 7, and then the succession of the archangelic beings. And after Trithemius von Sponheim, Rudolf Steiner gave names to these beings who are fulfilling the intentions of hierarchies. You can say are actually the doers, the will of the Trinity, and take pass the torch of human becoming, of human evolution, Earth's evolution. Of course, one can only speak vaguely about particular units there in this cosmic process, but every such succession would take place approximately every 12 generations. So what does it mean? That means that the way we are, well, is always contingent to a working of the archai. The archaic being, the archai, in a certain sense, and this is spoken of in this compendium of the lectures about angels, that human form, all the way to physical body, is kind of an extension of the archai. And now if we know that these archaic beings that have their beginnings way in the old Saturn are in this process of rotating, of passing the torch, we can assume that people we do change our entire constitution, not only spiritual, but also physical and etheric, every 12 generations. We can only see 3 generations behind. We can't see 3 generations ahead. That's interesting. We can't see future, but we can see 3 generations behind, meaning my parents, and my grandparents rarely, maybe some of you had this experience, would see the 4th generations, inheritance. And then it's actually veiled fifth, sixth, and so on generation is veiled. And what we hear today with popular science, when we hear different beings were such and such, this is mostly mythology. These are imaginations, maybe based on some discoveries in archaeology. If you take that rule as it is, then we have to assume that the way we look physically is extremely, extremely different from what our ancestors looked 12 generations ago. Why? Because different archi was, so to speak, supporting and creating, giving imprint on the etheric physical form from his own being. And of course, we know now that after Rudolf Steiner, right, that we live since 1879, we live under the regency, under the influence of the spiritual being who we know under the name Michael. This is a Hebrew name. Micah, El. Every time we see El is divine. Micah may be translated in a few ways. One way to understand this word Micah El, is who, literally, who looks like divine being, who looks like God. Which is interesting because, of course, this is also a question. Michael has this unique name among the seven, who is actually a question. Who is like God? Right? Out of this, the tradition and linguistic process leads us to who is like God, who looks like God, the countenance, the face of God. Right? So these connections. Michael, again, during this very complicated spiritual process, I'm not claiming that I understand that, but during certain times, once this rotation, 7 times 12, let's say, and this is average, it's not so geometrical, mathematical, but one full cycle of when 7 archangels are passing the torch, this is another number, lasts approximately around 2,500 years, which means that this regency that we are in, Michael regency, the cosmos, the world, has found itself already at least once. This was 2,500 years ago, and another 2,500 years ago, around 5,000 years ago, and so on, so on. Of course, it's not so much so mechanical, because the mystery that we are contemplating here in coming and sitting at the table of the spiritual being is that they also change. The spiritual being, the angels, even such powerful beings as archi, they change. Meaning, especially through the intervention of Christ, through Golgotha, this communion is not now really happening between the angelic world and our world, and we have something to say. We can sit at the table with such mighty being as an archi. Now, when we take that cosmic week and we look at our week, then all of a sudden the presence of the spiritual world is not somewhere there far away behind the veil or on the other side of the threshold, but those names of the archangels that weave our evolution are imprinted on the days of the week. And look, even if the French Revolution was the first attempt, at least in modern time, to discontinue, to eradicate the ancient forms, all the way to including to erasing what was the week always, right? Revolutionaries, they wanted to replace 7 days with 4 days, something like that. They tried. 2-3 years it lasted, and it didn't hold sway. So in our ways, in our days of week, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, the etheric imprint, as if, is preserved all the way to our language. So Sunday, of course, is the day of the sun. Monday is the day of the moon. Tuesday comes from the Germanic god two, which had the same characteristics or gestures as Mars in Latin sphere. So Tuesday comes from the day dedicated to the god of expansion, sky, but also war, of impulse. Then Wednesday comes, of course, from Wotan's Day, which has its counterpart in different mythology as Mercury, and of course in Hebrew as Raphael. We'll talk about it a little bit, what are these connections. It's not so obvious maybe. Then Thursday is, of course, day of Thor, Donnerstag, the day of the one who is throwing thunders, Zeus, Jupiter. Friday, the day of Freya, Latin Venera, Greek Venus. And of course, Saturn Day is obvious, the day of Saturn, the Sabbath day, the seventh day, right? So again, you have the seven. Those things are interestingly woven into the liturgy of the Christian community. This is an allusion to my previous talk. Of course, we do celebrate and we commemorate as if this holy period of 12 holy nights is kind of an extract of 12 holy months, as you know. An amazing timelessness of this period between Christmas, especially New Year, then later on it starts getting noisy. But there is a feeling of really being elevated, being lifted up from the irregular stream of time. This is when the angels are very close. Kind of a polar gesture to that is that of Holy Week. Essential to Christianity, essential to understanding our esoteric Christianity. Holy Week is just important as Holy Nights. But what's the difference? That in Holy Week is very difficult to grasp consciously because it's the time where we truly are fully engaged in life, right? Monday, Tuesday, we Christians try to uphold that either in your own esoteric word or we as a community, we celebrate every day. We try to lift something out of the grave of the social life where the consciousness of these seven beings and seven processes kind of went too deep into the material world, materialism. Today, nobody really understands that 7 days of the week are dedicated to these amazing beings. So that's what we're trying to do in Holy Week. And when you take those days of the Holy Week, Sunday, Palm Sunday, all the way to Resurrection Sunday, you can imagine that each of these days is a little oculus, is an instrument through which, a window, through which we can see those larger, ever larger spheres of the workings of the great spiritual beings. This is how close it is to us. And Christ walks through Holy Week. He wakes up those beings to the new mission, so to speak. De facto, he also redeems or brings anew the 7 days of creation. And every week later, if we live out of consciousness like that, every week, which starts on Sunday for us, when we come and worship here, may have that quality that we take something from the altar here, take something from this renewed consciousness, and we plant it on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and so on and so on. We are waking up those around us and those spiritual beings by saying, yes, we are aware that you are giving us form so that our social life can actually take place. And when I said social life, it's, of course, we have all the way to economical process, right? Something is planted, you can say, on Monday, just like this, under the symbol of the moon, the germination, the process of the seed was always indicated. It goes through intensity on Tuesday. It goes through mercurial alchemical process on Wednesday. It goes through kind of a flourishing on Thursday. And finally, often it was when I came to this country, we would always receive a check on Friday. You know, I was so thrilled because in Poland it was every 30 days. Here you could have this palpable kind of an effect of your own work as society. This Venus, which is always related with this astrology, with values, that symbol of wealth, second house. And then, of course, it goes into Saturday, repose. And then we start everything anew on Sunday. This is Holy Week every week. But of course, as long as it's going to be unconscious, threefolding will never take place. Threefolding begins with our understanding of what Holy Week is. And what is behind those names I mentioned, Sunday, of course, the great influence of the Archangel that von Sponheim and Rudolf Steiner, after him, later associated with the name Michael. Moon intelligence, you can say, or the being that is the great wisdom of the occult sphere of the moon. Gabriel, the great annunciator, the great midwife, right? And then we have Tuesday, this god of war in Judeo-Christian nomenclature, which has its beginning from the book of Enoch, esoteric book of Enoch, This being associated with Tuesday is called Samael, the sting of God. That's his name in English. Samael, the sting, the sword of God. Then you have, of course, Raphael for Wednesday, Mercury, Hermes. Rapha in Hebrew is medicine, medicine of God. Raphael, healing of God. God is my healing. Thursday, these are names that we know, and von Sponheim and Rudolf Steiner uses those names. The being of Jupiter, of Thursday, is Zachariel, which can be translated as God's command, intention, God's goal even. So maybe behind that name we have this indication of the next planetary stage, Jupiter. That's intentions of the spiritual world, that we pay our dues and do our work and begin on Jupiter. Anael is the intelligence, spiritual intelligence, divine being, archangelic being that has to do with Friday. With this, Anael is Hanael, the grace of God. So you have this little feminine element there, Venusian element, and finally this stern look of the archangel, who's the oldest of all of them, the memory of the cosmos, is the great scribe of the Father God. That's just how esoterics would describe Saturn, the great scribe, the one who doesn't forget ever, is Uriel. Or Orifiel, Rudolf Steiner calls him Orifiel. That's the different nomenclature, same beings. Just like what I mentioned, you can ask yourself, what is the connection between Wodan, Hermes, Mercury, and Raphael? I will permit myself a personal remark. My beginning with anthroposophy, this was a real question for me. As a fairly young man, I was interested in symbolism, Jung, all those things. It bothered me that I could observe that the qualities behind different divinities all over the world, all over the history of mysteries today, would say, they're similar. But the names are so radically different. And of course, out of anthropology, we're told that they're made up by human beings. They're thought out. So the great Quetzalcoatl, the feather snake of the Mexico, pre-Columbian Mexico, who taught how to cultivate corn, or taught them how to write or how to count, has exactly the same qualities as Egyptian Thoth, who taught Egyptians how to cultivate Nile River. So I was bothered with that, but I couldn't find an answer anywhere. Finally, I met a person who's a eurythmist, dear friend of mine, who said very, very radically, for spiritual world, time and space has no meaning. So, meaning in different cultures, out of different oculus of different mystery centers, people would give the same spiritual beings different names. Of course, I can understand that today. I think we all can do, knowing that Christ was known to all mysteries from the beginning of the mysteries in the Atlantean times, and also saw other spiritual beings, including those archangels. So we have this basket woven by the seven that kind of work out of the message, out of the sending of the 12, right? What is behind this number 7? 3 always has something to do with time. 3, Trinity, past, present, future. The Father God, the Son God, now creating always, and the future, the Spirit God. 4, always in esoteric language, has to do with space. It's this square, basic square, as a symbol of the house, yet without a roof, right? So when you combine time and space, we have this most amazing invention of the gods, with a little help of Lucifer, which we call the evolution, right? Imagine no other being in the entire cosmos, spiritual, physical, in no heavens, has an opportunity to go through what we go through. No other being can experience the pattern of sevens the way we do. They are the sevens. They give the bodies, they give their space, so to speak. They create that substance so we can go through the cycles of 7, which is nothing else but our spiritual, physical evolution. what we call it from our perspective, suffering. They didn't know about it until they sent the Christ. But there is truthfulness behind it, that the 7 is always related with the process, the processual. Just like we have 7 sacraments from birth all the way to the last anointing, the process of life, the process of becoming. And the greatest gift that the human beings, that each of us are being given, is that we can experience this. As children, very, very naturally, so to speak, the birth of the ether body at 7, the birth of the astral body at 14, they are still natural, they're woven into the natural processes of growth. This gets a little bit more tricky at the time of puberty, and definitely with the birth of the I, that even though it as a form is there, but of course we know that you have to reach up and seize your I in order so that your I is an I, the consciousness soul. So this is the threshold when the natural process is no longer natural, but becomes cultural, becomes spiritual, becomes religious. And so with all other stages after the birth of the I. After 28, it is not so obvious that we are going through these subsequent stages of development if we don't work out of the I. Or, more than that, if we don't open our I to this divine I that joined the course of evolution in the event that we call the passion of the mystery of Golgotha. One can then look, of course, at this process of passing this torch and ask oneself, what are these different beings? So Uriel and Hanael and Zachariel and Raphael and Samael and Gabriel and Michael, what are these beings truly? What life, what consciousness, how do they shape us in the course of this chronology of angelic rotation? And Steiner was very clear about it, that the mystery of Golgotha, the Holy Week, the little Holy Week, took place under the regency of Uriel. So Uriel was the guiding spirit, archangel, at the time when Golgotha took place. Golgotha is, in a certain sense, a projection of that great cosmic mood of 30, the year 33, which is also related to this one generation. When I said at the beginning, 12th generation. Well, how much is one generation? How do you count it? One generation is when your child procreates. So you're getting your grandchildren. So it's around 30, 33, 35 today. Occultly speaking, one generation is always related to the age in which either Christ incarnated or Christ was crucified. When Jesus approaches John, he's 29, 30 years old. Christ incarnates in him, and de facto new generation, the monogenesis, the only begetting, happens when Jesus is 30 years old. And out of this, occult schools would always consider 30, 33 as the signature of next generation. And because of that, the calculation here that I'm using is 12 times 30 years. One such regency lasts 360 years. When you look back, this was Uriel, and this is now Michael in 1870. When you do minus 360, then we would have 1519 as a beginning of the recent regency of Gabriel. Our week goes Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and so on. The cosmic chronology, the archangelic week goes backwards, so to speak. So Sun, Moon, Gabriel, then 1159. Again, there are approximations. The beginning of the rulership of Samael. Then we have 799. The beginning of the rulership of Mercury, Raphael. 439, Zachariel. 247, the Friday, Anael. And here, during the period when Mystery of Golgotha takes place, Uriel is the ruler. Since 281 before Christ, Uriel was the regent, which also, of course, concurrently in the world history means the decline, the end of the golden period of Greece, which was sprouted through the blessing of Michael, known in Greece as Apollo Perseus. There is more to it. The previous regency of Michael, which started, according to these calculations, 641. So it's not only Greece and Aristotle and the Academos Forest inventing thinking, but we have, of course, also Confucius in China. There's the same period of time. We have Gautama Buddha in India. We have Lao Tse and a number of other cultural impulses all over the globe, all over the world, which were all happening during the previous regency of Michael. You see what this being is bringing, always enlightenment. This is just to say, whenever we complain that we live in very difficult times, this is nothing. Difficult times will happen when Uriel will take over the regency. Then everything will be sifted. Of course, it's different than in the previous times, but one can always say that, according to Goethe, in every phenomenon, smaller phenomenon is a kind of an indication of a larger spiritual reality, and yet larger spiritual reality. So you can also say that if we learn how to recognize a mood prevailing in those years when different archangels are ruling, then we can have not only understanding a little bit tone of the past, what were the impulses that other spiritual beings were bringing in the past, but we can also start developing apocalyptic vision, learning the mood and thinking what will be when Uriel will take over after Michael. Very challenging to think that all those gifts today that we have, which of course we know, I'm saying for instance AI or internet, they're causing a lot of disturbance. One can say that they generate or maybe they reveal evil. But from a certain point of view, they are the gifts that are available to us in the era sponsored by Michael. The way I understand that is, if Michael pushed away the spirits of darkness in 1879, a little bit earlier, he didn't, of course, do it as a punishment to the human beings. He did it because he knew that human beings can outsmart those dark beings, that we can get hold of them, digest them, and turn them around into something that will be beneficial. Otherwise, we would have to assume that all those things that are happening since 1879, a little bit earlier, they're punishment of Michael. This is a heresy, occult heresy. Just when we think, Michael, 1879, this is pretty much modern era. Gabriel, since 1517, this is advanced Renaissance, Northern Renaissance. So actually, and turning into actually industrial revolutions, all those things somehow relate to the mood, to the being of this strange, mysterious Gabriel, known from the Gospel of Luke. Gabriel as the moon intelligence is always somehow tied to materialism. He's not, of course, the spirit of materialism. We know there's another one. But just by the sheer fact that he is that cosmic midwife and he's the sponsor of all genetic inheritance, bloodstreams. Without Gabriel, we would not be able to incarnate. He is that genius that combines, people sometimes even against their karma, bring them together, and out of them offspring comes. This is all a signature of Gabriel. So in that regard, he's related maybe not to materialism, but to existence in the material world. This is related. One another day we'll speak about it, that of course also Gabriel is the initiator of Muhammad. Muhammad had a conversation with Gabriel in Al-Aqsa, out of this inspiration, entire Islam came to be. That means that no other but Gabriel is a true initiator of Mohammedanism. Samael, very important, the sting of God. Rothstein points out that the whole emergence of the consciousness soul in 1411, the era of the fish, has begun under the rulership and signature of Samael. That's why consciousness soul times have this strong imprint of a Martian, very assertive character. There's a reason for that. So now think about it. If and this is not in any case any statement of my beliefs or not. Question: why is there such a strong push against the male element in our times? It's actually a push against Samael himself, which eventually may be understood as a push against the development of the consciousness soul. I'm saying it very gently. I know it's a laden statement, but one has to think about those things. There's a reason that why divine powers decided that the consciousness soul should be sponsored by Samael. And this vibration, this baseline, this character is going all through the stages of the entire epoch of fish. Maybe it has to do with transformation of Mars into something higher, right? But you can't transform Mars into something higher if you remove Mars from evolution altogether. Mars has to be revealed. What I was saying earlier, that spiritual beings are now evolving together with us. So it's our cultural task to help Samael to leave the past of bloodshed and all those things that are still happening in the world right now. They shouldn't be happening. But this is a cultural task. Mars must become peace. It has to do with the whole Buddha story on Mars. There's a reason Buddha was asked to pack up and go to Mars. Then we have a Raphaelic age, when this archangel is sponsoring actually the emergence of almost all European nations, the great beginning of the maybe not yet states, but state consciousness in Germany, France, Charlemagne, all those things. This is all Raphael, the great alchemy, actually the beginning of also of the great alchemy of the first schools that later evolved, for instance, in Chartres and so on. This is all out of Raphaelic inspiration. We look 5th century with Zachariah. This is, of course, the end of Rome, and so on. Anael is this time when Gospels were written out of this mystical connection with the Word, when the stories that the apostles were, the Word that was living among human beings, this mysticism of the Word, mysticism of the number, in fact, was fading at some point. And out of this living Word, the original Christianity, Gospels were extracted, so we don't forget. It's also related to Hanael, and so on. So this is just an attempt. One can, of course, work with this and meditate on this. And it's amazing to think that there is such way to understand the history, right? Because the problem that we have today is that we actually, especially in America, we don't understand history as a living process. And that's a problem. So if we do, at least we have this opportunity to connect. If we're working on history with individualities, particular people. It's very strong in the United States. For instance, the whole story of the founders, and they're always individuals, interestingly. But what I'm sharing with you is that there is no understanding history without understanding that there is this passing of the torch, and one of these 7, like in kaleidoscope, not so mechanically, but once every 360 years, one of them becomes the spirit of time. Out of the spirit of speech, out of the spirit of nation or group, one of them influences entire culture. And that's the recent metamorphosis of this sort was, of course, the story with Michael, when around this time, 19th century, Michael, until that moment, was very, very closely related to the whole soul and the spiritual destiny of the Hebrew folk, right? This is an undeniable fact that that angel that Jacob was wrestling when he was crossing Jabbok Ford on the way back to Holy Land, when he was about to face Esau, was Michael. He revealed himself as such, and this is why out of this wrestling with the angel, Jacob called the name Panuel, the face, the countenance of God. So this is the moment when something happens with the destiny of the chosen folk, the Hebrew folk, namely they receive their name through Jacob. They receive a name Israel, the fighter, the warriors of God, and this whole legacy is going for many, many, many centuries. Of course, there is a change in Michaelic being himself too. He's not the same being that was known as Marduk, for instance, in Babylonia, right? So this is a change, transformation. The question is, had Jacob not wrestled Marduk, Michael, would Michael ever leave Babylonia and become the soul of the spirit of the Hebrew nation? So the same question can be asked about the period 1879. Had Rudolf Steiner don't go with his wrestling around this time, with materialism actually, with his apparent agnosticism, actually, when you read biography, Rudolf Steiner was highly agnostic, critical of Christianity very often. He wrestles with himself, and out of this wrestling, Michael is able to reach up whole another stage in his evolution. He leaves that whole amazing legacy of the Hebrew nation and becomes the spirit of time, of whom Rudolf Steiner becomes champion. This is just a little sharing and a couple of maybe unorthodox, maybe challenging thoughts. It's nice to work about it and always bring different angles to the table, because there's so much, of course, to work out of this amazing impulse that we are gathering around.